Okay, so we're going to set up for the next panel, Tapping Culture for Creativity, being hosted by Damon Jones and Dr. Marcus Collins. After the video, they will join us on the stage.
Good afternoon, good people.
Come on, y'all. We can do better than that.
Y'all can do better than that.
There we go. There we go. Awesome.
Dr. Marcus Collins.
What's up, my brother? How are you?
Man, I'm blessed and highly favored. How are you?
Amen. I am feeling all the good vibes. We are in the south of France, the French Riviera. The sun is high. God is good.
God is good. And we got a beautiful audience out here, and we got a topic that you love to talk about. I love to talk about it, too.
I can talk about it ad nauseum.
So we're gonna get into it. So I'm gonna do a little introduction because when I asked Marcus how he liked to be introduced, he told me professor and author, best-selling author. And if I had put professor and best-selling author on a billboard at Cannes, no one would have come. But it also sells him short. So I like to think of you as the classic multi-hyphenate. So professor, best-selling author, cultural translator, award-winning marketer. I mean, you got a whole bunch of degrees. This man has a doctorate in marketing, an MBA, but on his resume, he has creative leader at Wieden Kennedy, Apple, and someone who knows a little bit about culture because he ran digital strategy for Beyonce. So that's congratulations.
Man, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. Thank you.
So cultural translator, I told someone we were doing a discussion, says cultural translator, what is that? And I started to describe what it was. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let you do that. But cultural translator, because you studied culture. So a lot of people here think they know culture, but you studied. What sparked your interest in culture?
I think for that very reason, working in advertising, we always say, let's get our ideas out in the culture. What's happening in culture needs to be informed by culture. And we would use the word it's so prolifically in how we talk about our work and what we do as an industry. But our understanding of it was like superficial, like extremely superficial, me included. Because I would say, you know, our ideas are this and culture, but I didn't have a really strong command of language to describe it. And it wasn't until I was in my doctoral studies that I stumbled over consumer culture theory, which is a field of study that takes anthropology, sociology, psychology, and marketing theory to describe not just the way people consume, but the governing operating system that informs that, and that is our culture, the system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and govern what people like us do. And if that be culture, like according to Emil Durkheim, that be culture, then a cultural translator is one who's able to communicate the conventions and expectations of one people for another group of people, and then do the same thing for those people to those people. In a lot of ways, when we talk about marketing communications and creative nodes, we're doing that very thing. We are filling media with meaning, hoping that when people see it, they make meaning the way we intended it to, which requires understanding how these people make meaning and for these people to understand how these companies make meaning. So that's the job that I do, translate culture from one party to the next.
Now, you've also described, and I won't get your quote exactly right, you said there's no more powerful force in influencing behavior than culture.
1,000%.
Which is a deep statement. So unpack it for us.
Okay, so there's no external force more influential to human behavior, full stop, right? What we wear, where we go, who we date, if we date, where we go to school, if we go to school, where we vacation, what we eat, who we marry, how we bury the dead, if we bury the dead. These things are all byproducts of our cultural subscription, not because of what they are, but because of who we are. And because of who we are, we see the world a certain way and then navigate life a certain way. And our consumption become byproducts of our cultural subscription, right? It's like, look at everyone here. Like, you think we wore what we wore today because we had our own volition, our own agency? Not so. Right? We are influenced by the social pressures that are around us that are formed, demarcated, and constructed by our cultural subscription. Everything we do is based on what people like us do. Right? Culture moves forward on the basis of one simple question. Do people like me do something like this? The answer is yes, we do it. The answer is no, we don't. We make that decision hundreds, if not thousands of times a day based on our cultural subscription. And in most cases, we don't think that, or it's not very relevant to us. But like, if you look at, think about this. In the 90s, if we were going to imitate a woman from our neighborhood, you go, okay, don't do that. Where'd that come from? Martin, Shanae, exactly, Shanae, right? Even without even knowing you, I know what to do because people like us do something like this. I mean, I love when you look on TikTok or on Twitter, Black Twitter in particular, and like people will say, who grew up with bedspreads like this? Mm-hmm. And you go, totally, I don't even know you, but I totally did. These things are normal for people like us because people like us do this normally. And therefore, if we understand these cultural forces that move us, that push us, then we have license, or at the very least, an understanding of how we impact it or influence it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, every year you come to Cannes and there's like one theme that overtakes everything. A couple years ago, like everything was about the metaverse, right? This year, everything's about AI. But I went through the Lions program, went through all the programs at the beaches. Culture was one of the second or third most popular words. Why do you think culture is so front and center at Cannes now?
Because there's this little book called For the Culture that I wrote. No, I'm joking. No, I think that I think we are coming to understand what has been true forever. And that's how all things are. I mean, everything is obvious when someone points it out to you. And as you start getting a refrain of people talking about culture, you go, maybe that's a thing. And thankfully, there are other thought leaders that are in the space that are writing about culture, that are evangelizing on behalf of culture. I mean, even the work you all do at P&G is for the culture, right? And the more you have people contribute to the discourse, it creates a cacophony that is unignorable. I mean, I imagine people who were working in AI 20 years ago was like, now y'all talk about AI? We've been on this. And the same thing goes with culture. It's like, now you talk about culture? We've been on this. Right? They're PhDs. Okay, Dr. Gabrielle. PhDs who are in the building who study culture and have written books about culture, been evangelizing on it. It's just people are just starting to catch up. And thankfully they are. Right? The idea is that now that we know, in the words of G.I. Joe, it's only half the battle. What are we going to do about it?
It's interesting. I think the discussions on culture, everyone arrives at their point in engagement with culture having had a different journey. Yeah. We both grew up in Detroit.
Holla. Hey.
You studied to be an engineer. So I want to back up a little bit. I want to talk about your path, your story. How did you get to this wonderful intersection of the things that form who you are today?
I mean, it sounds wonderful when you look at it in the rearview mirror, but going through it, it was not. So I'm from Detroit, born and raised, did well in math and science. And when I was growing up in the 90s, if you did well in math and science and you're black, you're going to be an engineer.
And you're going to work for one of the big three.
Exactly. So like, I went into engineering thinking that's what I wanted to do. After my freshman year, I was like, I don't think this is for me. My mother's an academic. She says, well, wait till you get into your major, you'll love it. Okay, got into my major, did not love it. Ended up taking some music theory courses to offset my terrible GPA because I grew up playing piano in church. Like, it's like I could do this and like not have all C's and D's. I took a music theory course, and I fell in love with major sevenths. And I was like, this. It felt familiar, but new. It was like novel, but at the same time, sort of I always knew it. So I was like, I think I want to be a songwriter. And I came home to my parents the summer after my sophomore year, said, Mom and Dad, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a songwriter. They were like, oh, nigga, please. No, you don't. That is not happening. And I remember, like, we were battling it out. I remember saying, you know, like, what if, like, I meet Quincy Jones and Quincy Jones wants to sign me? And she's like, I don't care if Jesus Christ wants to sign you. It ain't happening. So I went back to school, finished my engineering degree, but spent all my time in the recording studio working on my craft, as it were. So when I graduated, I went to the music business, wrote love songs for a living. I wasn't terribly successful, but I did like a few remixes with like John B. and D12 from the D. Yep. And I realized that the music industry was under massive disruption that we know is digital. So I decided to go back to school to figure out what this digital thing was all about, and went back to Michigan to get my MBA, and then came out, and that's when I started working with Matthew Knowles and Beyonce.
Got it. And then here you are.
And here I am. You know, I think that like, it was never on sort of the vision board that would be in advertising, but I thought advertising, they were just so good at doing what people want to do, putting things in the world at scale, right? Like, even the scale of Beyonce at the time, this is like in the Sasha Fierce days, you know, we put something in the world, millions of people will see it. But when brands put things in the world, hundreds of millions of people see it, right? Before there's the network effect. And I was like, that's really powerful. Not only that, but brands are doing a better job of breaking artists than record labels were. And I thought that that's really kind of the place to be. And if you look at everything in the world, practically, it's underwritten by a brand. Like a brand cuts the check or underwrites the thing for it to happen. And you go, well, I think I can have greater impact there than I could sort of further down the value chain. So I went into advertising at a place called Big Fuel, pure play social agency that got acquired by Publicis. Then I met Steve Stout. And he's the one who actually brought the language of culture to my vernacular. And I was like, I thought it was just cool, but he says it's culture, so I'm gonna call it culture. And again, and I think that like his understanding of it at such an early time, I mean, this is like 2011. Like that wasn't a part of our jargon as an industry. You know, he just realized, he had a really good sense that the closer you are to cultural production, the more credence and value the brand becomes for people who subscribe to that culture. And though he wouldn't describe it that way, like once I sort of got hooked on that language, I wanted to see what it was all about, and that's when I went into the doctoral studies.
So let's get into this. We're talking about brands. You got some brand marketers out here getting it right and getting it wrong. Yeah. And we don't necessarily have to name and shame, but if you think about brands that get it wrong, what happens along their path that you think they miss an insight, they miss a way of thinking about it differently that allows them to end up on the wrong side of the conversation?
So I think it starts off with the framing of how we think about observing consumer insights. I think that we start with looking at consumers as boxes that aren't who they are, right? Age, race, gender, household income, geography, they're the ways that we describe them. And since we sort of reduce people to these veneer, the hardware, without understanding the software, our identity, our beliefs and ideologies, then I think we start off on the wrong foot to begin with, right? So we put them in boxes that are not real. And then when we think about them from a cultural perspective, we tend to reduce culture to popularity. So we say what's happening in culture, we essentially mean what's popular. And while what people are wearing, what they're saying, what they're doing, what they're eating, where they're going, they are important, but they are byproducts of our cultural subscription. So when we study culture, when we look at culture as trends, we end up doing trend spotting. Trend spotting tells us what people are doing, but culture is focused on why they're doing it. What meaning are people ascribing to the artifacts they use, the behaviors, the ceremonies that are normal for them, the language that's a part of their vernacular? Culture is in service of studying that, right, underneath the veneer. So we don't know people, put them in boxes. Secondly, we don't really understand culture. So now we're just chasing what is popular. And then the third issue is that a lot of brands don't have a point of view of the world beyond what they do. My razor's sharper, my battery lasts longer, my car goes faster, my shampoo will get you laid, right? And like essentially that's how the brand focuses on how it sees the world based on value propositions alone. So now they don't really have a good sense of self. They don't have a good sense of who the people are. They don't have a good understanding of what culture is. So they essentially just jump on what's hot. And they kind of do their version of it. And every time they do it, you go, oh, man, it was cool till you jumped in. Yeah. Like, man, this was really cool. Now you just ruined it because of that lack of understanding. What I would argue say is a lack of intimacy. So I think if we start with saying, who are people? They are social animals. They are cultural beings. And if we see them for who they are, not the boxes that we put them in, we start off at a better foot. When we say, okay, culture isn't just what they're doing, it's why they're doing it. It's the system of conventions and expectations that govern who they are. Great. So what are the artifacts, behaviors, and language of these people? What is their cultural production? What does it mean to them? Then we go, okay, so how then do we engage with them based on how we see the world? Because we believe this, therefore we can participate in this discourse through our own convictions, through our own beliefs. And it feels like we belong there. That is like, you're like a million times more likely to engage groups of people in a meaningful way that way than just jumping on things based on my product and its features and benefits.
Yeah, because I think conventional wisdom might say, okay, well, let me go therefore find some cool people who are doing the trendy things that you talked about, throw them in a room, give them some money, and say, go forth. So if that's conventional wisdom, tell us why conventional wisdom isn't wise.
Yeah, because you can't buy your way into community. You can't. Like, you can, let's put it this way, you can pay for a ticket to come to the party, but people ain't going to engage with you. Mm-hmm. You're going to sit over in the corner being like, I'm here, hello, right? But if I'm like, yo, I'm cool with Damon, or Damon's like, yo, this is my boy Marcus, I get a +1. And that +1 comes with a tremendous amount of credence that you don't have to pay for in currency, or at least in capital. You pay for it in social capital, in social currency, because I've invested in the relationship. So for a brand to invest in a relationship of communities, of people, when they take a step out and be brave and do something, the community goes, yeah, those guys, they've been rocking with us since day one. And as a result, the brand has a new level of credence in the minds of the population, and it begins to propagate into the zeitgeist. I think that that's really, really powerful. No check alone can do that. It's your proximity to it that makes that happen. So when you put things in the world, like the look, people go, yes, dude, yeah, y'all get it. Understanding sort of the nuances that make up who we are and how we self-identify, it helps people feel seen. And as a result, your brand becomes a way by which they project their identity to the world. I think that's just unbelievably powerful.
Yeah, so let's flip it and talk about the brands that get it right. Yeah. Brands that when you look at them, you say, oh, they get me, they see me, they understand who I am. Yeah. What do you think happens in the creative rooms, in the strategy rooms? What do those brands write in their brief, or how do they engage with their agencies that takes them on that journey that you talked about a minute ago?
I think they kind of start with who are we and how we see the world. Right? I talk about this a lot in the book. I think about REI as a good example of this. REI is an outdoor sports retailer, right? They sell things you do for canoeing and cycling and hiking, all things I never do. And they, as a company, while they sell those things, they believe that a life outdoors is a life well lived. That's who they are. And because they hold that belief system, they go, okay, so how do we engage with the world accordingly? And their ads are communicative of that. But they don't just say it, they actually do it in their behavior. So a few years back for Thanksgiving, Black Friday in particular, which, and by the way, in 25 states, Black Friday is a holiday. People have the day off.
It should be a day off.
Unless you work in retail, right? And the idea there is like, well, the CEO, Jerry Schrisky, says we should be closing our doors on Black Friday because that's the day that at least half of the country has off. Then we should be promoting or exciting them to go outside and play. And someone in the room goes, but dude, we make tons of money. We go from the red to the black. That's why it's called Black Friday on that day. And Jerry says, but if that's what we believe, then that's what we should be living up to. So, you know, they unprecedentedly close their doors on Black Friday and encourage people to go out and play. And they turn off their website, so you couldn't buy anything on Black Friday. They paid their employees to go out and play. And that weekend, they made more money that Black Friday weekend than they ever had before because they were living up to their beliefs. And people who saw the world similarly goes, that's my kind of brand. I rock with them. And therefore, they consume accordingly. It didn't start with, like, what is the consumer insight? It started with, who are we? Who are the people who see the world the way I do, which is the consumer insight? And then how do we engage them in a meaningful way, right? Like, you know, the jobs to be done. What are the jobs to be done for these people? Not just the functional job, but the emotional and social job, which is 2/3 of the job, right? So product aside, 2/3 of it had nothing to do with the performance of the product, but everything the way people feel. And this is what we're after, right? If we know who we are, then I can engage you in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned consumer insights, right? P&G, everything we do is built around consumer insights. Insights. But you said we need to go beyond that. So as you think about understanding people's cultural beliefs versus simply stopping at a consumer insight, is there a difference?
So I think that, I don't differentiate the two. I think that we mistake information for insights.
Okay.
I think that we got tons of information on people and we go, oh, that's insightful. They go, well, no, that's just true. Not insightful, it's just true. So, well, what's the difference? For me, it's not splitting hairs. Truth is about what is, subjectively speaking. But I think insight is about what does it mean? Like, what does it mean? You know, like, the fact that folks who wear Jordans don't play basketball in Jordans. And you go, well, that's the truth. They don't play basketball in Jordans, right? Well, why do they do that? It's like, because they're kicks, my G, that's why. Right, because they're kicks, they're not meant to be played in, they're meant to be flossed. That's why. Understanding that meaning allows you to engage with those people in a meaningful way. So I think that I think that you all in P&G have done a great job at looking at the consumer insight through the product functionality, but how do people want to feel emotional, how do people want to be seen, and we engage them accordingly. I think that, while again, it feels like hair splitting, I think the differences are gargantuan with regards to what it means for how we engage people in a real way.
Yeah. Now, in your book, you talk about how humans give things meaning. You got a whole chapter in that, right? On giving things meaning. So I want to go back and maybe use the Jordan as an example, right? You give it meaning. So maybe start back. Talk to us about why meaning is important and that understanding of the process in a way that allows us to help people.
So meaning is important because everything around us is meaningless. Like everything that your eye sees has no inherent meaning. We give it meaning. We imbue things with meaning. This comes out of the semiotics literature. A gentleman by the name of Ferdinand de Saussure, one of the founding fathers of semiotics, he says that what we see and what it means is completely arbitrary. And why is that? Because what we see hasn't been negotiated and constructed until it has been. For instance, if I say, what is red? You probably say it's a color. Or someone would say, it's a wavelength that forces your eye to see a color, activates your eye to see a color. Great. But if you're driving through an intersection, red means stop. And green means go. And if you're in the States, yellow means hurry up. And the idea there is that does red inherently mean stop? No. Right? Neither does red mean hot or fire or sexy or danger or caution or exit. We have collectively decided that these things mean this. And therefore, we engage with the world accordingly. So by themselves, they have no meaning. They're void of meaning. And then we collectively decide what these things mean. Now, for brands, that couldn't be more important because we as brands, we are stewarding vessels of meaning. Brands, they are identifiable signifiers that conjure up thoughts and feelings in the hearts and minds of people. And just like any other thing in the world, brands don't have inherent meaning. We give it meaning. And that's a hard pill for marketers to swallow. Because here we are, Cannes Lion, celebrating the best, most creative communication ideas in the world. And they are meaningless until someone says, oh, word up. Word up, I buy that. And if they don't, they go, nah, we don't believe you need more people. So the idea there is that we are constantly signaling meaning to the public in hopes that people receive the intended meaning and agree with it. Right, so we signal meaning, people make meaning. Therefore, we had to find congruence with how we signal based on what it means. It's like, we know this when we think about our personal relationships, right? Like, I know when I say something to my wife, I have to say it a certain kind of way because she's going to interpret it a certain kind of way. And because of my intimacy with my wife, because I know my wife so well, I go, Alex is going to get pissed if I say it this way, so let me say it that way. The same thing should go when we talk it to the public, right? It's like, we know our people, and if we say it like this, people will be like, nah, fam. So we say it like that so that we reach meaning congruence. And there's some times that we find ourselves out of sync. For instance, my wife was like, did you do the dishes? I go, yes, dear. She go, why you say it like that? I was like, I said, yes, dear. It's like, that's what your face said, right? So these different means by which, the different modalities by which we communicate, they're all being translated by the public, by the people. So we have to be able to communicate in a way that is congruent with the way people make meaning, which requires a radical amount of intimacy with understanding how people translate the world.
But it also requires you understand your relationship with that person as well,
100%.
because I could say, honey, did you do the dishes? And that would get a very different reaction if I'm talking to your wife.
That's right. She'd be like, honey. But no, you're right. Like, so understanding, I didn't say the audience, I'm saying the people, who you're talking to, the message receiver, right? Such that when you communicate, what you intend is what they see. And that's an important part, because brands aren't what we tell people they are what they tell each other they are, based on how they make meaning. And how do we make meaning? Through our cultural frames.
Yeah. So brands don't have meaning, and they honestly don't have relationship until you build it, right? So as brands think about coming closer to culture, coming closer to a more diverse set of consumers, how do they need to step along that in a way that's carefully, that builds credibility, that does not get them disinvited to the cookout?
So I think that, there's a few things. The intimacy part we talked about. We have to know who they are, not based on the boxes that we put people in, right? Like, I hear this all the time. Like, the African-American consumer, and I go, oh, really? Tell me about that person. What do all black people do? And I wait for you to say something racist. We do the same thing with Hispanics. Like, we put people in the boxes because it reduces them to something that's easy for us to engage them, but that's not what's reflective of all their intersectionality, all their complexity. So intimacy is required first. And then once we achieve intimacy, we then go, okay, we know who these people are, we know what matters to them, how then do we engage them in all their intersectionality, in all their diversity? I think it requires thinking about cultural appropriation as a set of conditions as opposed to a binary thing. So I think there's a lot of fear of cultural appropriation because there's a ton of negative association with it. But cultural appropriation actually exists in 4 different forms. There is, and cultural appropriation is all about power. Like, we talk about appropriation, like, is it appropriate to, like the transference of, this is about power. So when 2 communities that are of equal power exchange things, exchange cultural conventions and make new things, we go, that's cool, that's hip hop. Black and brown people together, exchanging their cultures, you create something new. That's amazing. 2 communities within equal sort of power footing. Then you have like a transculturation, like the United States. Like people from different cultures, like I'll eat Greek one day, Italian the next day, Japanese the next day, and soul food the other day, right? And then there's like cultural dominance, that we are minorities in the hegemony, and we want to acculturate, so we code switch and the like. So those 3 things are sort of natural. The 4th form of cultural appropriation, that's the thing that we need to be worried about, and that's cultural exploitation. That's when we take the cultural markers of a group of people and rework them to give them new meaning. We sort of strip everything of the creators and imbue things with new meaning because we have the power to do so. So those 2 things work together. The more intimate we are, the less likely we are to exploit. Because we know that in doing this, we are robbing them of their personhood. And we respect these persons. It's like, kids who go to Coachella wearing headdresses. You go, fam, what are you doing? They wear them because they look cool or irreverent. It's like, but these things are sacred artifacts to people. And I don't think it's because they are malicious or intentionally trying to be hurtful. I think they're just ignorant. They just don't know. They're not close. They don't have the intimacy. But if we did have the intimacy, we'll go, oh, I would never do that because I know what it means to these people. So intimacy allows us to mitigate any error of exploitation, which keeps us out of the snares that is being canceled when we try to engage with culture from a diverse perspective.
Yeah, I love the interdependence in that. One of my colleagues is here, Leela Coffey, and as we've been on our journey to win with more diverse consumers, we're having these conversations all around P&G, and we're trying to figure out how do we take all of the insight that we've picked up, and she developed what's called a 4R framework, really, which says, okay, great, here's how I'm going to win not just with multicultural consumers, here's how I'm going to win with all consumers, and it starts with reach. Am I reaching them? Am I representing them, right? Am I creating relevance with them by virtue of I have a product that actually works for them, meets their needs? Am I talking to them in relevant situations? And then am I doing that in a resonant way to your point, am I getting that nod, right? And I think what a lot of people don't get is that all of those things need to be true, and it's not just one thing. I just can't stick a group of young people or cool people or black and brown people, stick in a room and say, create.
That's right. And what I love about that is that when you start looking at it through that frame, you realize that we're like all multicultural. Like we're of many, 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 many cultures, right? Like you may be a sneakerhead and into hip hop and into trans, right? 3 different communities you're a part of. And black, 4 different communities you're a part of. And all 4 of those things represent who you are. And the more likely we are to realize the intersectionality of people, those multiple hyphenates that make up who we are, and we're able to talk to people through that lens, they go, dude, you see me. And when people feel seen, it's a wrap. Like, if you see me, like you have carved out a special place in my heart and real estate in my mind. But it starts with us being able to recognize all the diversity that makes up our individuality to understand the diversity that makes up the collective.
Got it. So we could not be at Inkwell Beach, a space, by the way, that didn't exist a few years ago and is now bringing many people together without talking about the importance of having diverse voices in the room. Why is that important to companies getting it right in the culture?
Oh, because diversity has unfortunately become a talking point that we have skirted away from just a few years shy of George Floyd's public execution. Like we poo-poo diversity because we think about diversity as a social good, like it's some philanthropic effort. Like let's bring Marcus into the building so we have a black voice. But the truth of the matter is that diversity is actually a strategic advantage. It is a business imperative because diversity at its core is just heterogeneity. It's just different ways of seeing the world. And it's because of those different ways of seeing the world that we get to new and novel solutions, right? The diversity bonus is that people who are in groups that are heterogeneous get to better solutions than people who are homogeneous. That is empirically proven, empirically suggested by a gentleman named Scott Page. But even more so, the more perspective that we have, the broader, the wider the world gets. The aperture of the world gets brighter. I think of it this way. It's like going to a basketball game. If you have courtside seats and I have nosebleed seats, you see a different game than I see, even though we're watching the exact same game. And in this way, the game is the game of life, is the socially phenomenal world in which we live in. And as you watch the game and I watch the game, we experience it differently, but both of our experiences are true. And therefore, if we want to get the best representation of the socially phenomenal world that we live in, we have to sit in many, 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 many more seats. And the more seats that we have represented as we are trying to solve problems, the wider the aperture is of the world and the better the solutions become. So having diversity in the room, again, not philanthropic in nature, it is just good business sense. I would argue say you're kind of dumb if you're not doing this.
Exactly. My final question for you. People are going to come back, say, I got really inspired by Can. I need to have some AI here. I want a brand, I want a new campaign that's really about the culture. Someone in the audience is sitting in that room when that comment gets made by perhaps a senior leader. What is it that you hope they say in that moment to set themselves, to set that company, to set that brand on a road to success?
When someone says, we want to get an idea that's going to get out in culture, I hope someone raises their hand and say, well, whose culture? Because there are many, 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 many cultures. Who we talk about here? Well, the culture. No, that's popularity, my friend. If we want to be a part of culture, then we have to identify who we're talking about, not the box that we put them in, but how they self-identify, and then say, great, let's engage this community through culture. What are their beliefs? Where are their artifacts, their behaviors, their language? What's the cultural production that they use to express who they are? When we get to that level of nuance, we get to the mechanisms that make culture move forward. And I think that will not only get us to better ideas, but I think that people will probably feel much more connected to the brands that they already love and maybe be introduced to a brand that, unbeknownst to them, sees the world the way they do. And now this brand becomes a way by which they project their identity to the world.
That's great. Dr. Marcus Collins, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so very much, sir.
I thank you for being here with us. But more importantly, thank you for the conversations that you allow many of us to have, right? These are lots of lived experiences that we bring, and your book and your words and your speaking really helps not only educate us, but inspire us and keep us pushing forward. So we
I'm
appreciate
so grateful. Thank you all for being with us. Thank Inkwell Beach for having me, P&G for having me. Always a pleasure, my brother.
Appreciate it.